Have you ever heard of an object so deadly that it can kill with a simple miscalculation? An object not created to amaze, but to annihilate. It all begins in a laboratory where a seemingly harmless metal sphere lies under the cold light of neon. At that moment, a blue flash tears through the darkness, and those nearby understand immediately. They do not have much time left to live. The body reacts, but the soul seems already gone. What was about to happen would become one of the darkest chapters of human science. Today we tell you the story of the demon core, the core of the devil, a fragment of plutonium shrouded in secrets and death. Our journey begins at the end of World War II, when the United States put an end to the conflict by dropping 2 atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But that wasn't an epilogue. It was the beginning of something even more frightening, the race to master the very heart of the atom. Welcome to one of the most disturbing tales in Protocol 33. With the surrender of Japan, the world breathes a sigh of relief, convinced that the nuclear horror is over. But behind the scenes, American laboratories are still buzzing with activity. $2 billion, which today would be equivalent to $34 billion, have been invested in the creation of the absolute weapon. And although its use has marked a point of no return, the thirst for power is not quenched. Nuclear, they say, can also be a source of progress. It can generate energy, open new avenues in science. But the truth is that the government wanted weapons, more powerful, more precise, cheaper. And to get them, it was necessary to understand every secret of the atom. Thus began a relentless series of experiments. The goal? To master nuclear reactions perfectly. But behind the facade of progress lies error, tragedy, and a trail of casualties. The war is over, but the race for destruction has only just begun. And in the heart of this scientific nightmare, the demon core is about to be born. To truly understand the scope of the demon core, we must return to the devices that changed history forever. Little Boy and Fat Man. 2 bombs, 2 cities obliterated in an instant. But their structure was profoundly different. Little Boy used the gun-type method. 2 masses of subcritical uranium were fired at each other to reach the critical mass. All it took was 1 bullet, 1 impact, and the chain reaction was triggered. Simple to build, devastating in its results. But the real monster was Fat Man, based on a more complex and even more lethal system. Implosion, a hollow sphere of plutonium surrounded by high-precision explosives, was instantly compressed to become supercritical. A synchronization error of a few microseconds was enough to fail. But when it worked, it unleashed a terrifying power. It is from this technology that the most dangerous research is born, and it is there that the demon core has its roots. Understanding the concept of critical mass is essential to get to the heart of this story. Every radioactive material has a threshold. If the quantity is too low, the material emits radiation slowly and steadily, even for thousands of years. But when that threshold is exceeded, a chain reaction is triggered. A neutron hits an atom, which breaks apart and releases more neutrons, which in turn break apart more atoms, all in infinitesimal fractions of a second. This is how a nuclear explosion happens. Consider that out of 64 kilos of uranium contained in Little Boy, only 700 grams actually generated the detonation. A handful of radioactive dust wiped out an entire city. And plutonium, even more unstable and powerful, requires absolute precision. A small error can mean nothing, but an inaccuracy in the opposite direction can cause the end. That's why they played with fire in the laboratories, and the demon core was the spark ready to explode. The Los Alamos laboratory in the desert of New Mexico was not just a research center. It was the epicenter of atomic power. Here they built the mines and materials that could change the fate of the world. And it was within these walls that a young physicist, brilliant and ambitious, began to work on a risky project. His goal? To understand the limits of plutonium, to push beyond, to calibrate with millimetric precision the threshold of critical mass. To do so, he used small blocks of tungsten carbide, a material capable of reflecting neutrons like a mirror. Carefully arranged around a sphere of plutonium, they served to increase the efficiency of the reaction. But one more brick, one miscalculation, and the entire experiment could turn into a disaster. That day, as the young physicist worked alone, a blue glow suddenly enveloped him. The Geiger counter went haywire. It had crossed the threshold, and the demon core had awakened. At that fateful moment, the young scientist realized he had made an irreversible mistake. The reflective brick had slipped from his hands, completing the reflection of the neutrons and pushing the nucleus beyond the critical threshold. A bluish flash, a terrible symbol of the reaction, illuminated the laboratory. His body was hit by a terrifying amount of radiation. In a panic, he tried to remove the fallen piece, but it slipped again. He then changed strategy and began to rapidly remove the other blocks. The radiation level decreased. Perhaps in that desperate act, he saved the structure from a nuclear catastrophe. But the price was high. Exposed for nearly a minute, his fate was sealed. Over the next few days, his body began to fail. His hands burned, his nervous system compromised, the pain unspeakable. He died 25 days later. He was only 24 years old. The demon core had claimed its first victim, and it wouldn't be the last. The death of that young man was not enough to stop the ambition. 9 months later, another scientist found himself face to face with the same block of plutonium. He had survived the first accident and decided to continue the experiments. The object was still there, radioactive, unstable, lethal. The experiment was nicknamed Tickling the Dragon's Tail. The name says it all. This time, however, no bricks. They used 2 hollow beryllium hemispheres, closed around the nucleus to reflect neutrons. The technique was simple and dangerous. Slowly bring the 2 caps together, monitoring the radiation. If anything went wrong, they could just be opened right away. In theory, at least. But the device used to keep them apart was a simple screwdriver. A human error, a slip, and the 2 hemispheres snapped shut. The lab was flooded with a second blue flash. The Geiger counter screamed. The demon core had struck again. And this time, there were 7 more people in the room. In the chaos generated by that discharge of invisible energy, the scientist made a desperate gesture. He grabbed the upper hemisphere with his bare hands and suddenly raised it, interrupting the reaction. An instinctive, heroic act, but also a condemnation. His body was hit by a lethal dose of concentrated radiation, becoming a shield for his colleagues. He died 9 days later, consumed by a silent and devastating agony. However, thanks to his sacrifice, the other scientists were saved. Some lived until the 2000s, others suffered permanent damage. Only one developed serious neurological problems, and another died of leukemia 2 decades later. The demon core, with its invisible and merciless radioactivity, had struck for the second time. 2 lives shattered, a legacy of suffering. Only then did the government decide. No more manual experiments. The risk was too high, the balance too fragile. But that decision came late, too late. After the horror, caution. Remote manipulation was introduced, with instruments controlled hundreds of meters from the radioactive materials. But science, like history, does not stop. The Demon Corps, still intact, was assigned to one last mission, Operation Crossroads, 2 nuclear tests at Bikini Atoll in July 1946. They wanted to study the impact of the explosions on ships, marine environments, materials, but also on living beings. They filled the ships with animals to observe the effects. And the humans? The inhabitants of the atoll were deported under an excuse. They were promised new islands to live on. But those islands had no fish, and fishing was their only source of sustenance. Entire communities were broken up, erased. And once again, the Demon Corps lived up to its reputation. It never exploded directly on a city, but wherever it went, it left behind death, mutation, and a silence as heavy as lead. A silence that continues to this day. The Bikini Atoll tests were conducted on July 1st and 25, 1946. 2 explosions, 2 devastations. Civilian and military ships, transformed into targets, were destroyed or contaminated. The data collected was disturbing, but even more frightening were the consequences for the people involved. The increase in mortality among those who participated in the experiments was 4.6%. The Demon Corps, in that last use, shone once more, spreading radiation and horror. Then finally, it was dismantled. But its legend remained intact, a fragment of plutonium that has crossed history as a toxic ghost, silent, unstoppable. It never exploded in war, yet it killed more people than most bombs. Today, its name is whispered in the corridors of science as a warning, a lesson written in blood and unstable isotopes. And yet even today the world still plays with the stuff of stars, with the same lightness, with the same eternal error. And then we wonder, how much have we really learned? The Demon Corps is not just a piece of nuclear history. It is a symbol of what the human being is willing to risk in order to assert his own power. 2 brilliant young men sacrificed on the altar of ambition, animals used as guinea pigs, populations wiped out to make room for experiments. The Demon Corps speaks to us again, not with words, but with its consequences. This is not just a tale of physics or engineering, it is a warning. In a world that today plays with artificial intelligence, with new forms of energy, and with increasingly sophisticated weapons, his lesson is more relevant than ever. We must remember that every new discovery brings with it a responsibility. If this story has touched you, we invite you to subscribe to Protocollo Trentatore, leave a like, and discover the other mysteries we have told. Because every hidden truth deserves to be brought to light. That said, thank you and see you next time.